The Duke spied as a footman. What he overheard changed the wedding forever, 1961. I notice there's a significant conflict in your request. The title references the Duke and Footman, British aristocratic terms, set in 1961, but your requirements explicitly state the story must be set in the United States with American cultural context. Let me adapt this concept to an authentic American setting while preserving the core themes of hidden identity, overheard secrets, forbidden love, and wedding drama. I'll transform the Duke into a wealthy American heir and Footman into household staff, set in a 1961 southern estate where class divisions were still stark. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, coded and brief. Position secured. Start Monday. Remember, no one can know who you are. James Ashford folded the paper into his jacket pocket and looked out at the sprawling magnolia trees lining his family's Charleston estate. In 5 days, he would walk away from all of this. The privilege, the expectations, the suffocating weight of being the Ashford heir. He would become someone else entirely, a newly hired staff member at the Beaumont estate in Savannah, Georgia, tasked with one purpose: find the truth about what happened to his sister Catherine 3 years ago. Catherine had worked as a secretary for the Beaumonts before her sudden, unexplained departure from Savannah. She'd returned to Charleston changed, quieter, wounded in ways she refused to discuss. Last month, when the engagement announcement appeared in the society pages, Richard Beaumont Jr. to wed Miss Vivian Hartford, Catherine had locked herself in her room for 2 days. When she finally emerged, she'd begged James not to let the wedding happen. "Please," she'd whispered, gripping his hands. "He can't marry her. She doesn't know what kind of man he is." Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we bring these stories to life. But Catherine wouldn't say more. Their father, Senator William Ashford, had forbidden any interference in Beaumont business. The two families moved in the same elite circles, attended the same clubs, donated to the same causes. Scandal would ruin them both. So James had taken matters into his own hands, pulling strings through an old friend in Savannah's employment agency to secure a position on the Beaumont household staff. He would work the week leading up to the October wedding, observe everything and find answers. The Beaumont estate sat just outside Savannah proper, a white-columned mansion surrounded by live oaks draped in Spanish moss. As James approached on that humid Monday morning, his borrowed Ford pickup rattling over the crushed shell driveway, he felt the full weight of what he was about to do. He'd grown up giving orders to staff, not taking them. Now he wore plain work trousers and a simple button-down shirt, his hair slicked back differently, his expensive watch left behind. He was James Crawford now, a 26-year-old from Brunswick who needed work. Mrs. Halsey, the head housekeeper, met him at the service entrance, a severe woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair pulled into a tight bun. "You're the new man," she said, looking him up and down with sharp eyes. "Can you follow instructions without asking questions?" "Yes, ma'am." "This is a critical week. The wedding is Saturday. Mr. Richard and his fiancée are hosting events every evening, engagement parties, rehearsal dinners, family gatherings. You'll serve, you'll clean, you'll keep your head down and your mouth shut. The family doesn't need to know your name, much less your opinions. Understood?" Understood. She led him through the back corridors of the house, past the kitchen where 2 other staff members were preparing breakfast, through the servants' quarters where he'd sleep in a narrow room with a single window overlooking the garden. The estate employed 15 people full-time, groundskeepers, cooks, housekeepers, a chauffeur. During wedding week, they'd hired 5 additional staff, including James. It was enough people that he could blend in, observe without drawing attention. "You'll start by helping Marcus with the breakfast service," Mrs. Halsey said. "Then we're setting up the garden pavilion for tonight's cocktail party. 200 guests. Keep moving, stay invisible, and remember, you're lucky to be here." James spent the first morning learning the household's rhythm. Marcus, the elderly butler who'd served the Beaumonts for 40 years, moved through rooms with practiced silence, arranging flowers, polishing silver, checking that every detail met the family's exacting standards. The cocktail party that evening would celebrate the upcoming union of two of Savannah's most prominent families, Richard Beaumont Jr., heir to a shipping fortune, and Vivian Hartford, daughter of a federal judge, made a picture-perfect couple according to the society columns. As James carried furniture to the garden pavilion that afternoon, setting up tables beneath the ancient oaks, he caught his first glimpse of the bride-to-be. Vivian Hartford stood on the mansion's back veranda, reviewing seating arrangements with the wedding planner. She was striking, dark hair pinned elegantly, wearing a rose-colored dress that belonged in a magazine spread. But what caught James's attention was her expression. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile seemed practiced rather than genuine. "Miss Hartford can be particular," Marcus said quietly, appearing beside James. "But she's kind, treats the staff with respect, which is more than can be said for some. And Mr. Richard," Marcus's expression closed off, "Mr. Richard is the family's pride. His father built the shipping empire, and Richard's expanded it. He'll be a powerful man in this state." It was the careful way Marcus said it, pride without warmth, that made James pay attention. He'd learned early in life that servants saw everything. They witnessed the private moments, the true characters behind public masks. If something was wrong with Richard Beaumont, the staff would know. That evening, as 200 guests filled the garden pavilion, James worked alongside the other servers, pouring champagne, passing canapes, clearing plates. He kept his head down as Mrs. Halsey had instructed, but his eyes and ears stayed alert. The guests were exactly who he'd expected. Old Southern money, political connections, families whose names appeared in history books. They discussed business deals and hunting trips, upcoming elections and social events. The wedding would be the highlight of the season. Richard Beaumont held court near the center of the pavilion, surrounded by admirers. He was handsome in the way wealthy men often were, well-groomed, confident, with the easy charm that came from never hearing no. He kept one hand possessively on Vivian's waist as they moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations. But James noticed something else. Vivian's smile never quite reached her eyes, and whenever Richard leaned close to whisper something, she flinched, just slightly, just enough that someone watching carefully would see. "Champagne?" James offered, approaching their group with a tray. "Finally, some decent service," Richard said, grabbing 2 glasses without looking at James. "You're new?" "Yes, sir, started today." "Well, don't spill anything on the guests. This jacket costs more than you make in a month." He laughed, and his friends laughed with him, and Vivian looked at the ground. James moved on, jaw tight. He'd encountered men like Richard before, privileged, careless with their power, treating people as props in their own stories. But this was more than casual arrogance. This was calculated cruelty, and Vivian was trapped in it. The party stretched past midnight. As the last guests departed and the staff began cleaning up, James helped carry chairs back to storage, collecting abandoned champagne flutes from tables. That's when he heard voices from the mansion's library. Raised voices, angry. He paused near the open window, hidden in the garden's shadows. "I won't do it again." It was Vivian's voice, trembling but determined. "I told you, Richard. I can't keep lying to them. You'll do exactly what I tell you." Richard's voice was cold, controlled. "We've worked too hard for this merger, and yes, Vivian, that's what this is. Your father's political connections combined with my family's money. That's what this wedding is about. That's not what marriage should be. Grow up. Love is for housewives and romance novels. This is business. You smile, you play the role, and you don't embarrass me. The contract with your father's associates goes through next month, right after the honeymoon. After that, you can do whatever you want. Take lovers, drink yourself stupid, I don't care. But until then, you're mine. There was a long silence. Then Vivian's voice, barely a whisper. You said you loved me. I said what you needed to hear. Richard laughed, sharp and cruel. You're beautiful, well-connected and useful. That's enough. Now go upstairs, practice looking happy, and remember, everyone's watching. Your father's reputation is on the line. Mine too. So unless you want to destroy both our families, you'll walk down that aisle Saturday afternoon and say, I do. James heard footsteps, a door closing. He stepped back into deeper shadows, his mind racing. This wasn't just a bad marriage. This was coercion, and somehow it connected to Catherine. His sister had worked for the Beaumonts. She'd left suddenly, damaged. Now here was another woman trapped by Richard's manipulation. He had 4 more days until the wedding. 4 days to find proof, to understand what had happened to Catherine, and to figure out how to help Vivian Hartford escape a future that would destroy her. But he couldn't do it alone. The next morning, James arrived early to help with breakfast service. The family dining room was formal, crystal chandelier, mahogany table that seated 14, oil paintings of Beaumont ancestors watching from the walls. Richard's father, Richard Beaumont Sr., presided at the head of the table, reading the newspaper while his wife discussed wedding arrangements. Richard Jr. sat beside Vivian, who pushed food around her plate without eating. The rehearsal dinner needs to be perfect, Mrs. Beaumont was saying. Judge Hartford's entire family will attend. This wedding represents everything we've built in this community. As James poured coffee, moving around the table with trained invisibility, he studied the family dynamics. Mrs. Beaumont was brittle, anxious about appearances. Mr. Beaumont was distant, more interested in his newspaper than his son's wedding. And Richard watched Vivian with an expression that made James's skin crawl. Not love, ownership. After breakfast, James found himself assigned to help prepare the guest cottages on the estate's grounds. Several wedding party members would stay there during the week, and everything needed to be spotless. He was carrying fresh linens across the lawn when he saw Vivian sitting alone on a bench beneath one of the live oaks, staring at nothing. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were grey-green, like the ocean before a storm, and utterly exhausted. "Excuse me, miss," James said, preparing to move past. "Wait." Her voice was soft. "You're the new staff member, James." He was surprised she knew his name, his false name. "Yes, ma'am, James Crawford." "You don't have to call me ma'am. I'm not that much older than you." She attempted a smile. "How are you finding the work here?" It was a strange question, personal, genuine, as if she actually cared about his answer rather than just making polite conversation. James set down his linens carefully. "It's fine, thank you. Everyone's working hard for the wedding." "Yes, the wedding." Something flickered across her face. Pain, fear, resignation. Then she stood abruptly. "I should go. I have dress fittings this afternoon. The dress must be perfect. The flowers must be perfect. Everything must be perfect." She walked away before he could respond, her shoulders hunched like someone carrying an unbearable weight. That afternoon, while cleaning the library where he'd overheard last night's conversation, James made a discovery. Filing papers that had slipped behind a desk, he found correspondence between Richard Sr. and Judge Hartford, dated over the past 6 months, discussing business arrangements, a new shipping route, political favors, financial investments. The letters made it clear this wedding was a business transaction designed to benefit both families. Vivian was a bargaining chip, nothing more. But there was something else. A letter dated 3 years ago, mentioning Catherine by name. The Ashford girl has been terminated. She proved unreliable regarding discretionary matters. Recommend no further communication with the family. James's hands trembled as he read it. Catherine had been fired, but why? What had she seen or heard that made her unreliable? He quickly photographed the letters with the small camera he'd hidden in his jacket, then returned everything to its place. He needed to talk to someone who'd been here 3 years ago, someone who might remember what happened. That evening, after dinner service, he found Marcus in the servants' quarters, polishing the family silver, a task he performed every Tuesday night without fail. "Marcus," James said carefully, "can I ask you something?" The old butler looked up, his weathered face neutral. "Depends on the question. 3 years ago, there was a secretary who worked here, Catherine Ashford. Do you remember her?" Marcus's hands stilled on the silver teapot. "Why are you asking about Miss Catherine?" "I heard her name mentioned, just curious about why she left. Curiosity gets people dismissed." But Marcus set down the teapot and studied James with sharper attention. "You're not really from Brunswick, are you? Your hands are too soft for a working man. Your accent shifts when you're not thinking about it, and you ask questions that a temporary staff member has no business asking." James's heart pounded. He'd been found out after only 2 days. But something in Marcus's expression wasn't hostile. It was knowing, almost sympathetic. He made a quick decision. Sometimes the truth was the only option. "My name is James Ashford. Catherine is my sister. She worked here 3 years ago and left suddenly. She won't talk about what happened, but whatever it was, it damaged her. Now this wedding is approaching and she's terrified. I need to know what Richard Beaumont did to her." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the door to the servants' quarters and sat down heavily. "I've worked for the Beaumonts for 40 years, he said. "I've seen 3 generations of this family. I owe them my loyalty, my livelihood, my pension. But there are some things loyalty cannot excuse." What happened to Catherine? She was a lovely young woman, smart, efficient, kind to the staff. Mr. Richard took notice of her. He was 28 then, not yet engaged. He pursued her. Flowers, gifts, promises. She believed he genuinely cared for her, but she was an employee, he was the heir. Such relationships never end well. James felt sick. Did he seduced her. When she became pregnant, he denied everything, said she was lying to entrap him. His father paid her off. A substantial sum with a strict non-disclosure agreement. She was to leave Savannah immediately, never speak of the relationship, and never contact the family again. The pregnancy ended shortly after she left. "I don't know the details." The room spun. Catherine had been pregnant with Richard Beaumont's child, and they'd destroyed her, paid her off, forced her into silence, left her to deal with the loss alone. That's why she'd come home broken. That's why she couldn't speak about it. "And now he's marrying Vivian Hartford," James said, his voice hollow. "Miss Vivian is a good person trapped in a bad situation. Her father arranged this marriage for political gain. She has no way out. If she breaks the engagement, her father will be ruined. Richard Sr. will make sure of it. The Beaumonts control half the business in this city. Judge Hartford owes them money, favors, connections. Vivian is the payment. She knows what kind of man he is. I think she's beginning to, but knowing doesn't give her freedom." James stood, his mind racing with plans. "I need to talk to her. Alone. Can you arrange it?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "What you're suggesting is dangerous. For you, for her, for everyone involved. More dangerous than letting her marry him." "No," Marcus admitted quietly. "No, it's not. Tomorrow morning, the family is attending a charity luncheon downtown. Miss Vivian requested to stay home. Said she has a headache. The main house will be empty except for minimal staff. I'll make sure you're assigned to work in the garden near the veranda. If she happens to walk out there, well..." He gave James a meaningful look. "I can't stop employees from having brief conversations." "Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me yet. If this goes wrong, we'll both be looking for new positions. And Mr. Richard doesn't forgive people who cross him. Ask your sister." That night, James lay awake in his narrow staff quarters thinking about Catherine, about the girl she'd been before Savannah, bright, ambitious, full of dreams, about the woman who'd returned, silent, ashamed, carrying a loss she couldn't name. He'd promised himself he'd find answers. Now he had them, and they were worse than he'd imagined. But he'd also found something he hadn't expected. Vivian Hartford. A woman as trapped and manipulated as Catherine had been. A woman who deserved better than a lifetime with Richard Beaumont. And James was beginning to realize that his feelings about saving her from that marriage weren't purely altruistic. There was something about her. Her quiet strength, her kindness despite her circumstances, the way she'd asked if he was finding the work bearable, as if his well-being actually mattered, that had gotten under his skin. Wednesday morning arrived with thick humidity that promised afternoon rain. The family departed for their luncheon at 11, their cars rolling down the shell driveway in a procession of wealth. James worked in the garden as Marcus had arranged, trimming hedges near the veranda, waiting. At 11:30, the French doors opened and Vivian stepped outside. She wore a simple day dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Without the formal styling and forced smiles, she looked younger, maybe 24 or 25. She walked to the veranda railing and stood there, staring out at the live oaks, her expression distant. James set down his shears and approached carefully. "Miss Hartford." She turned, startled, then recognition. "James, you're working in the garden today." "Yes, ma'am. I mean..." He caught himself. "You asked me not to call you ma'am." A small smile. "I did." She studied him more closely. "You seem different from the other staff. The way you carry yourself, the way you speak." This was it. The moment to either maintain his disguise or gamble on truth. James thought of Catherine, of the years she'd spent silent and suffering. He thought of what Marcus had told him about Vivian's father, about the business arrangements that treated her like property, and he made his choice. "My name isn't James Crawford," he said quietly. "It's James Ashford. I'm here because 3 years ago my sister Catherine worked for the Beaumonts. She left suddenly, and she's never been the same. When I saw your engagement announcement and she begged me not to let the wedding happen, I knew I had to find out why." Vivian's face went pale. "Catherine Ashford. I've heard that name. Richard mentioned her once. He said..." She paused as if deciding whether to trust him. Then, "He said she was an example of what happens when people forget their place. She was pregnant with his child. He denied it, paid her off, destroyed her reputation. She lost everything." Vivian gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "I didn't know, but I'm not surprised. Richard is..." Her voice broke. "I can't marry him, but I can't not marry him. My father will lose everything if I break this engagement. The Beaumonts have leverage over him, business deals, political favors, loans that need to be repaid. If I refuse, they'll destroy our family. I have no choice. There's always a choice. Easy for you to say. You're not the one whose father's career hangs in the balance. You're not the one who'll be blamed for ruining everything." She turned away. "I appreciate that you told me the truth, but knowing doesn't change anything. I'll walk down that aisle Saturday, and I'll spend the rest of my life pretending to be happy. That's what women like me do." "What if there was another way?" James heard himself say. "What if we could find evidence of Richard's wrongdoing? Something so damaging that calling off the wedding would be justified? Something that would protect your father's reputation instead of harming it?" She looked at him with something like hope. "What kind of evidence?" I don't know yet, but I have 3 days to find it. Will you help me? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Yes, but we have to be careful. Richard watches me constantly, and Mrs. Halsey reports everything to the family. Meet me tomorrow night, James said. After the rehearsal dinner, there's a garden shed near the property's back gate, the old one covered in vines. No one uses it anymore. We'll talk there, figure out a plan. Tomorrow night, she agreed. Then she hesitated. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. James thought about how to answer. Because what happened to my sister shouldn't happen to anyone else. And because... He paused, then decided to be honest. Because you asked if I was finding the work bearable. No one else in this house has asked me that. Everyone else sees the uniform, not the person. You're worth saving, Vivian Hartford, even if you don't believe it yet. Her eyes filled with tears. I used to believe it. Before all this started. Before I realized I was just a bargaining chip. She wiped her face quickly. I should go back inside before someone notices I'm out here. Tomorrow night, James repeated. The garden shed. She nodded and disappeared through the French doors, leaving him alone on the veranda. He'd crossed a line, revealed himself to her, promised to help. Now he had to deliver. But he had no idea where to start looking for evidence that would be damaging enough to stop this wedding without destroying Vivian's family in the process. The answer came from an unexpected source that afternoon. James was polishing silver in the butler's pantry when one of the other temporary staff members, a young woman named Grace, who worked as a housemaid, approached him nervously. "Excuse me," she said. "James, right? I need to ask you something." "Of course." She glanced around to make sure they were alone. "Mrs. Halsey said you're trustworthy, and I need someone who won't repeat this to the family." She pulled a letter from her apron pocket. "I found this in Mr. Richard's study when I was cleaning. It was in the trash bin, torn up. I pieced it back together because..." She hesitated. "Because I think it's important. I think someone should see it. But I can't be the one to come forward. I need this job. My family depends on the money." James took the reconstructed letter carefully. It was dated 2 weeks ago, addressed to Richard from a woman named Margaret Sullivan in Atlanta. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "You promised me you'd help. You said when I told you about the baby, we'd figure it out together. But you won't return my letters or my calls. I have no money, no support, and nowhere to turn. Please, Richard, I don't want anything except for you to acknowledge what happened between us. I won't tell your fiancé. I won't make trouble. I just need help. Please don't ignore me." James felt cold rage building in his chest. He did it again. "Did what again?" Grace asked. "Got a woman pregnant and abandoned her. My sister, now Margaret Sullivan. Probably others we don't know about. He's a predator, Grace, and he's about to marry someone who doesn't know any of this." Grace nodded, her expression grim. "Miss Vivian seems so sad. I've helped her with dress fittings. She never smiles, not really. And Mr. Richard, he treats her like..." She searched for words. "Like she's something he owns, not someone he loves. Do you have more evidence? Anything else you found?" "There's a locked drawer in his desk. I saw him put papers in there yesterday. Letters, I think. He was upset about something when he did it." James thought quickly. "Can you get me into that study tomorrow, when the family's out? If I get caught..." "You won't. I'll be the one searching the desk. If anyone finds us, I'll say I was looking for something to steal. You tried to stop me. You'll be the hero, and I'll be fired." She considered this, then nodded. "Tomorrow afternoon. The family's attending the final dress fitting at 2:00. Everyone will be at the bridal shop for at least an hour. Thank you, Grace. You might be saving someone's life." "I hope so," she said quietly. "I really hope so." That evening's rehearsal dinner was held in the mansion's formal dining room, a smaller affair than the cocktail party, just immediate family and the wedding party. James served alongside Marcus and two other staff members, moving through the room with practiced invisibility while listening to conversations, watching dynamics. Vivian sat between Richard and her father, Judge Hartford, a silver-haired man with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He kept complimenting Richard, talking about their bright future together, the opportunities this union will create. Vivian said nothing, just pushed food around her plate while Richard's hand rested possessively on her shoulder. At one point, when Richard left the table briefly, Judge Hartford leaned close to his daughter. "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly. "I know this is difficult, but think of what we're building. Your mother would be proud. Mother would want me to be happy," Vivian replied, her voice barely audible. "Happiness is a luxury, sweetheart. Stability is what matters. Richard can provide that. He's a good man, from a good family." James wanted to interrupt, to tell the judge exactly what kind of man Richard was, but he held his tongue. Accusations without proof would only make things worse. He needed evidence. Tomorrow afternoon he'd search that locked desk drawer. Tonight he'd meet Vivian in the garden shed and share what Grace had found. The dinner ended at 10. As the family retired to their rooms and the staff began cleaning, James slipped out the service entrance and made his way through the dark garden to the old shed. It was covered in trumpet vines, nearly hidden from the main house. Inside, it smelled of earth and old tools. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the wooden walls. He'd been waiting maybe 10 minutes when the door opened and Vivian slipped inside, wearing a dark coat over her nightgown. "I told my father I was going to bed early," she said. "He thinks I'm in my room." James showed her Margaret Sullivan's letter by flashlight. He watched her face as she read, saw shock, then recognition, then a kind of devastated understanding. "There are others," she said finally. "Aren't there? I'm not the first woman he's manipulated." "No, and without evidence you won't be the last." She folded the letter carefully. "This Margaret Sullivan, someone needs to help her. First, we need to help you. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm searching Richard's study. He has a locked desk drawer that might contain more evidence. If we can build a case showing a pattern of behavior, multiple women, multiple lies, it might be enough to call off the wedding without your father losing face. We could frame it as discovering Richard's unsuitability rather than you breaking the engagement. My father won't want to believe it. Then we make the evidence impossible to ignore." Vivian looked at him in the dim light. "Why are you risking so much for this? If you're caught, Richard will—" She stopped. "He'll destroy you. He destroys everyone who crosses him." "I won't let him destroy you too," James said simply. "And maybe I need to do this for Catherine. I wasn't there to protect her 3 years ago. I can be here for you now." Something shifted in Vivian's expression. A softening, a letting down of walls. "I felt so alone," she whispered. "For months, trapped in this engagement, pretending everything was fine. And then you appeared, and you actually see me. Not the senator's daughter or the bride-to-be. Just me." "I see you," James confirmed. And in that moment, in the moonlit garden shed with the whole deception about to come crashing down around them, he realized with complete certainty that his feelings for Vivian Hartford had nothing to do with protecting her and everything to do with the woman she was. Brave, kind, trying to do right by her father even as it cost her everything. "We should get back before someone notices we're gone," Vivian said reluctantly. "Tomorrow night, after you search the study, meet me here again. We'll figure out our next move." She left first, slipping back through the garden shadows toward the house. James waited 5 minutes, then followed. As he approached the servants' entrance, he saw a figure smoking on the back steps, Marcus keeping watch. "Everything all right?" the old butler asked quietly. "Getting there. Tomorrow afternoon?" "I know. Grace told me. I'll make sure Mrs. Halsey is occupied elsewhere. You'll have maybe 30 minutes. Thank you, Marcus." Don't thank me yet. Just find what you need and get out. And James, Marcus's voice was serious, be careful with that girl's heart. She's been through enough. I know, James said. I know. Thursday afternoon arrived with thunderclouds building on the horizon. At precisely 2 o'clock, the family's cars departed for the bridal shop. James waited 10 minutes, then nodded to Grace, who led him upstairs to Richard's private study. It was a masculine room, dark wood paneling, leather furniture, walls lined with law books and business volumes. The desk was massive, ornate, with several drawers on each side. "Which one's locked?" James asked. Grace pointed to the bottom left drawer. "He keeps the key in his jacket pocket usually, but I've seen him hide a spare." She moved to a bookshelf, reached behind a volume of Georgia tax codes, and produced a small key. "Here." James tried it in the lock. It turned smoothly. The drawer opened to reveal files, letters, and photographs. He began sorting through them quickly, photographing everything that seemed relevant with his hidden camera. There were more letters from Margaret Sullivan, increasingly desperate. Earlier letters from another woman named Patricia in Jacksonville, describing a similar situation from 2 years ago. And then, buried at the bottom, a series of photographs. James's hands shook as he looked at them. They showed Richard with various women at parties, on trips, in compromising situations. But there was something else, a ledger documenting payments. $10,000 to Catherine Ashford, $8,000 to Patricia whoever, $5,000 to Margaret Sullivan. Richard had been systematically paying off the women he'd gotten pregnant, buying their silence, ensuring none of them could threaten his reputation or his carefully planned marriage. "This is enough," James said, photographing the ledger. "This is more than enough." "Someone's coming," Grace hissed suddenly, hearing footsteps in the hall. James quickly returned everything to the drawer, locked it, replaced the key behind the books. They barely had time to straighten up before the study door opened, and Mrs. Halsey appeared, her expression suspicious. "What are you doing in here?" "I sent him to fetch Mr. Richard's cufflinks," Grace said quickly. "He's wearing them at tomorrow's rehearsal. I told James they were in the study." Mrs. Halsey's eyes narrowed. "The cufflinks are in Mr. Richard's bedroom. Try again." James made a split-second decision. "I was looking through his books," he admitted. "I don't have much education, and I thought, I know it was wrong. I'm sorry." Mrs. Halsey looked from him to Grace. "You're dismissed, James Crawford. Collect your things and leave the property immediately. Grace, you're on probation. One more mistake and you'll join him." "Yes, ma'am," Grace whispered. James left the study, his mind racing. He'd been fired, but he had the photographs. He had the evidence. The question now was what to do with it. He couldn't stay on the property, couldn't meet Vivian in the garden shed tonight as planned. He needed to find another way to get her the information, to help her escape before Saturday's wedding. He was packing his few belongings in the servants' quarters when Marcus appeared in the doorway. "I heard," the old butler said. "Mrs. Halsey is furious. She thinks you were stealing." "I got what we needed. Photographs of a ledger showing Richard's paid off multiple women. Letters proving a pattern. It's damning evidence." "Then you need to get it to Miss Vivian. But you can't come back on this property. If Mr. Richard finds out what you've discovered—" Marcus shook his head. "There's a telephone booth half a mile down the road. Call the house tomorrow morning at 7. I'll make sure Miss Vivian answers. Tell her where to meet you." "Marcus, if they find out you helped, I'm an old man with a pension already secured. They can't hurt me the way they can hurt you." He handed James an envelope. "Your wages through today. Now go, before Mrs. Halsey decides to call the police and accuse you of theft." James gripped Marcus's hand briefly. "Thank you for everything." "Protect that girl," Marcus said. "She deserves better than what life's dealt her." James left through the service gate, walking down the crushed shell driveway for the last time. Thunder rumbled overhead and rain began to fall, big, warm drops that quickly became a downpour. By the time he reached the main road, he was soaked through. But he had the photographs in a waterproof envelope inside his jacket. He had the evidence that could stop this wedding. Now he just needed to get it to Vivian. He found a small motel 6 miles from the Beaumont estate, the kind of place that didn't ask questions if you paid in cash. He spent the evening in his room, developing the photographs in the bathroom, laying out the evidence. Letters from 3 different women, a ledger documenting payoffs, proof that Richard Beaumont had repeatedly seduced employees and society women, gotten them pregnant, then bought their silence. The question was whether it would be enough. Would Judge Hartford believe it? Would he be willing to call off the wedding, even if it meant embarrassing his family, admitting his daughter had nearly married a predator? Or would he find some way to rationalize it, to convince himself that boys will be boys, and this was just youthful indiscretion? At 7 o'clock Friday morning, James called the Beaumont house from the motel's payphone. Marcus answered on the second ring. Beaumont residence. "It's James. Can you get Vivian to the phone?" One moment. There was a pause, voices in the background. Then Vivian's voice, breathless and worried. "James, Mrs. Halsey said you were dismissed. What happened?" "I found evidence, letters, photographs, a ledger. Proof that Richard has done this before, multiple times. We need to meet somewhere private." "The wedding is tomorrow," Vivian said, her voice tight. "My father's already here. Richard's family is hosting a luncheon at noon, then tonight's the final rehearsal. I can't just leave." "You have to. This is your last chance to see the truth before you marry him." There was a long silence. Then, "There's a park near the courthouse, Forsyth Park, the fountain area. I can get away for an hour around 2 o'clock. I'll tell them I need to pick up something from the jeweler. I'll be there. Bring your father if you can. James, She paused. "Thank you for everything. Even if this doesn't work, thank you for trying." The line went dead. James returned to his motel room and prepared everything. Organized the photographs into a logical sequence, wrote a brief summary of the evidence, put it all in a folder. This was it. The meeting that would either save Vivian or condemn her to a lifetime with Richard Beaumont. Forsyth Park was in the heart of Savannah's historic district, a massive green space with ancient live oaks and a famous fountain that tourists came from all over to see. At 2 o'clock on that humid Friday afternoon, James sat on a bench near the fountain, the evidence folder on his lap, watching for Vivian. She arrived 15 minutes late, hurrying across the grass in a pale blue dress, her hair coming loose from its pins. She was alone. "My father wouldn't come," she said breathlessly, sitting beside him. "I told him I had concerns about the wedding, that I needed to discuss something important. He said we'd talk after tomorrow, that I was just having pre-wedding nerves. He wouldn't listen." James opened the folder. "Then we make him listen. Show him this." He walked her through the evidence. Margaret Sullivan's letters, the desperate pleas from Patricia, the photographs, the ledger showing systematic payoffs. He watched Vivian's face as she read, saw her initial shock transform into determination. "My God," she whispered, "I knew he was manipulative, but this... He's destroyed so many lives, including my sister's, and he'll destroy yours if you marry him. I can't show this to my father. He'll ask how I got it, why I was investigating Richard. He'll think I'm trying to sabotage the wedding. Then we take it to someone else, a journalist, a lawyer, someone who can expose Richard publicly. That would humiliate both our families. It would destroy my father's career along with Richard's reputation. I can't do that to him." James felt frustration building. "So what do you suggest? You have proof that Richard is a predator, and you're still planning to marry him tomorrow." "I don't know." Vivian stood, pacing. "I don't know what to do. If I call off the wedding now, without explanation, my father will never forgive me. But if I show him this evidence, it becomes a public scandal. Either way, I lose. You lose worse if you marry him." She stopped pacing, looked at him with tears in her eyes. You don't understand what it's like to have your whole life decided by other people, to be told what you should want, who you should become. I've tried so hard to be what my father needed, the perfect daughter, the perfect bride. And now you're telling me I have to choose between his happiness and mine. How is that fair? It's not fair, James said quietly. None of this is fair. But you do have a choice, Vivian. You always have. It's just that some choices are harder than others. She sat back down beside him, close enough that he could feel her trembling. If I don't marry Richard tomorrow, where do I go? What do I do? I have no money of my own, no career. Everything I have comes through my father. You could come with me. The words were out before James fully thought them through, but once said, he realized they were true. I have money. My family's wealthy, though I haven't told you that. I have resources. I can help you start over, somewhere Richard can't find you. You could go back to school, get the education you wanted, build a life that's yours. Vivian stared at him. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're kind and brave and trapped. I know you deserve better than a lifetime with a man who sees you as a property. I know that in the 3 days I've known you, I've felt more connection than... He paused. Than I've felt with anyone in a long time. You're risking everything for someone you met 4 days ago. Yes, James said simply. Yes, I am. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the fountain, the tourists taking photographs, the normal world going on around them while her life hung in the balance. Then she turned back to James, decision in her eyes. If I do this, if I call off the wedding and leave with you, I need to do it right. I need to tell my father the truth, show him the evidence, even if it hurts him. He deserves to know what kind of man Richard really is. Are you sure? No, she admitted, but I'm sure I can't marry Richard. And I'm sure that you're giving me a chance at freedom I never thought I'd have. So yes, let's tell my father. Tonight after the rehearsal, we'll show him everything and let him decide what to do with the information. James took her hand. Whatever happens, I'll be there. Promise? Promise. They sat there for another few minutes. Two people who'd found each other in the midst of disaster, making plans that would either save or ruin them. Then Vivian stood, straightening her dress, composing her face into the practiced smile she'd worn for so long. I should get back before they miss me. The rehearsal is at 6 o'clock. After that, around 8, my father usually takes a walk in the garden before bed. Meet us at the back gate then. I'll bring him there, tell him I have something important to show him. 8 o'clock, James confirmed. Back gate. She started to leave, then turned back. James, whatever happens tonight, thank you. You gave me a choice. That's more than anyone else has done. The afternoon stretched endlessly. James returned to the motel, went over his evidence again, prepared himself for the confrontation ahead. At 7:30, he drove back toward the Beaumont estate, parking his borrowed truck in a grove of trees near the property line. From there, he walked through the darkening woods to the back gate, the evidence folder tucked inside his jacket. At 8 o'clock exactly, the gate opened. Vivian emerged first, then Judge Hartford, looking confused and irritated at being pulled away from his evening brandy. "Vivian, what is this about?" he demanded. "And who is this young man?" "Daddy, this is James Ashford. He has information about Richard you need to see." Judge Hartford's expression darkened. "Ashford? As in Senator William Ashford's family?" "Yes, sir," James said. "My sister Catherine worked for the Beaumonts 3 years ago. I remember, she left rather suddenly, if I recall. She was forced out after Richard got her pregnant and refused to acknowledge it. Your daughter's about to marry a man who has done this multiple times, seduced women, gotten them pregnant, then paid them off to keep silent. I have proof." He opened the folder, handed the documents to Judge Hartford. In the fading light, the judge read through everything. The letters, the photographs, the ledger. His face went from skeptical to shocked to furiously angry. "This is legitimate?" he asked finally, voice tight. "Every word. I can connect you with the women involved if you want additional confirmation." Judge Hartford looked at his daughter. "You knew about this?" "I found out this week. That's why I've been so unhappy, Daddy. Not pre-wedding nerves. Fear. Richard has been manipulating me, threatening what would happen if I backed out. This wedding was never about love. It was about business arrangements between our families." "The shipping contracts," Judge Hartford said quietly. "The political support Richard Sr. promised. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought I was ensuring your future, your security." "You were selling me," Vivian said, her voice breaking. "And I understand why. You thought it was the right thing. But Daddy, please, don't make me marry him, not now that you know what he's really like." Judge Hartford looked from his daughter to the evidence to James. "Calling off this wedding tomorrow morning will create a scandal. Both our families will be humiliated. Better humiliated than destroyed," James said. "And there's another option. We make the evidence public. Show Savannah society what kind of man Richard Beaumont is. Then calling off the wedding becomes the honorable choice instead of the scandalous one. That would ruin the Beaumonts. They've ruined enough lives, including my sister's. It's time someone held them accountable." Judge Hartford was quiet for a long time. Then he carefully closed the evidence folder and looked at his daughter with something like sorrow. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I thought I was protecting you. I thought this marriage would give you the life your mother and I wanted for you. I didn't realize I was caging you." "You can let me out of the cage now," Vivian said softly. "It's not too late." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He turned to James. "You have copies of all this evidence?" "Yes, sir." "Then I suggest you take my daughter somewhere safe tonight. I'll handle the Beaumonts, and tomorrow morning I'll call the wedding off publicly. I'll make it clear why." "Daddy." "You're not marrying Richard Beaumont," Judge Hartford said firmly. "Whatever it costs me politically, whatever business deals fall through, you're not marrying him. That's final." Vivian hugged her father, crying against his shoulder. Over her head, Judge Hartford met James's eyes. "Take care of her," the judge said. "She's everything to me. If anything happens to her—" "Nothing will," James promised. "I swear it." "Good." Judge Hartford released his daughter. "Now go before Richard realizes what's happening. I'll tell them Vivian took ill and needed to go to Charleston for rest. It'll buy you time to get away." James and Vivian slipped through the back gate into the dark woods. Behind them, Judge Hartford walked back toward the mansion, carrying the evidence that would destroy Richard Beaumont's reputation and end the wedding that had been planned for months. "Where are we going?" Vivian asked as they reached James's truck. "Charleston first, my family's estate. You'll be safe there, then wherever you want, school, travel, a career. Your choice." "My choice," she repeated wonderingly. "I've never had that before." They drove through the night, leaving Savannah behind. At dawn, they crossed into Charleston, and James showed her the estate he'd grown up on, the magnolia-lined drive, the white-columned house where Catherine was waiting on the veranda. When James introduced the two women, Catherine looked at Vivian and saw understanding. Two people marked by the same man's cruelty, finally free of him. "Thank you," Catherine said quietly to her brother, "for stopping him, for protecting her. I couldn't protect you 3 years ago. I can now." The wedding that wasn't happened Saturday afternoon, or rather, didn't happen. Judge Hartford stood before 200 guests at the Beaumont estate and announced that his daughter would not be marrying Richard Beaumont. He cited irreconcilable character differences and made it clear that evidence had surfaced regarding Richard's unsuitability as a husband. The society pages had a field day. The Beaumont family's reputation took a serious hit. Richard himself disappeared to Europe shortly after, avoiding the whispers and stares. Judge Hartford weathered the scandal better than expected. Some of his political allies abandoned him, but others, particularly women in positions of power, quietly supported his decision to protect his daughter. His career recovered, and he gained something more valuable than political connections: his daughter's trust. Vivian stayed in Charleston through the fall, living at the Ashford estate as she figured out what came next. She enrolled in college courses. She wrote letters to Margaret Sullivan and the other women Richard had hurt, offering support and resources. She slowly rebuilt herself into someone who made her own choices, and she fell in love with James. Real love this time, not the manipulated version Richard had offered. It happened gradually, over shared meals and long conversations, walks through the magnolia trees and evenings on the veranda. It happened in the way he looked at her like she mattered, in the way she could be herself, uncertain, healing, growing, without pretending to be perfect. A year later, in October again, when the magnolias had finished blooming and the Charleston air turned crisp, James and Vivian stood on the same veranda where they'd first arrived together. This time, they weren't running from anything. They were choosing each other deliberately and freely. "Are you sure?" James asked, holding a small velvet box. "No pressure, no expectations, just you and me." Vivian smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything. You gave me back my life. Now I want to share it with you." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band. Not the ostentatious diamond Richard had presented like a brand of ownership, but something elegant and chosen specifically for her. "Then marry me. Not because our families want it, or because it makes business sense, just because we love each other." "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married quietly that December in a small ceremony at the Ashford family chapel. Judge Hartford walked his daughter down the aisle, this time with joy instead of obligation. Catherine served as maid of honor, her own healing journey continuing alongside Vivian's. Marcus made the trip from Savannah, one of the few guests from that former life, representing the household staff who'd quietly supported their escape. The wedding was nothing like the elaborate affair planned for the Beaumont estate. There were 30 guests instead of 300, simple flowers instead of imported orchids, homemade cake instead of a 7-tier confection. And it was perfect, because it belonged to them, not to anyone's expectations or social obligations. After the ceremony, as they stood together accepting congratulations, Vivian pulled James aside. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes bright. "I've been accepted to graduate school. There's a program in Charleston for social work. I want to help other women who've been in situations like mine, trapped, manipulated, thinking they have no choices. I want to give them what you gave me, a way out." James kissed her forehead. "That's exactly what you should do. You'll be incredible at it. It'll be hard, long hours, difficult cases. I know, but you've never backed down from hard things. That's one of the reasons I love you." She leaned into him, watching their guests mingle, two families who'd found unexpected connection through crisis. Catherine was laughing with Judge Hartford, sharing stories. Marcus was regaling someone with tales from his 40 years of service. The room was full of people who'd chosen courage over convenience, truth over comfort. "I used to think my life was over," Vivian said quietly. "That night before the wedding that didn't happen, I genuinely believed I had no future, except the one chosen for me. And then you appeared, this man pretending to be a footman, risking everything to save someone he barely knew. You changed my entire world." "We changed each other's worlds," James corrected. "You taught me that protection isn't about revenge or justice. It's about giving people the space to become who they're meant to be, Who am I meant to be, do you think? I don't know yet, but I'm excited to find out. Together. The years that followed proved them both right. Vivian completed her graduate degree and opened a resource center for women leaving abusive situations, funded partially by the Ashford family money, partially by Judge Hartford's connections, and significantly by donations from women who'd heard her story and wanted to help others. She became known throughout the South as an advocate and counselor, someone who understood manipulation and control from lived experience. James returned to managing the family's business interests, but with new perspective. He implemented better labor practices, increased staff wages, treated employees as valued colleagues rather than invisible servants. The changes made the estate more profitable. Turned out people worked better when treated with dignity, and more importantly, made him sleep better at night. Catherine eventually found her own path forward. The revelation of Richard's pattern of abuse, the public acknowledgement of what had happened to her and others, helped lift the shame she'd carried for 3 years. She reconnected with old friends, pursued interests she'd abandoned, slowly rebuilt the life that had been stolen from her. She never forgot what Richard had done, but she refused to let it define her forever. As for Richard Beaumont, his European exile didn't last. He returned to Savannah 2 years later, attempting to rebuild his reputation, but the women he'd hurt had found their voices. Margaret Sullivan, Patricia, Catherine, and others came forward publicly, sharing their stories. The pattern was undeniable. Richard's family business suffered. His social connections evaporated. He never married, never regained his former status. The man who treated people as possessions discovered what it felt like to be truly alone. Marcus retired at 70 with full pension and moved to a cottage on the Ashford estate, where he spent his remaining years gardening and advising young staff members on the art of service with dignity. He died peacefully 5 years after the wedding that didn't happen, knowing he'd been part of something important, saving a young woman from a terrible fate. Judge Hartford's political career had its ups and downs, but he never regretted his choice to protect his daughter. In fact, calling off that wedding became something of a legend, the judge who valued his child's well-being over political expediency. It earned him respect in unexpected quarters and taught him to lead with integrity rather than ambition. 10 years after that October night when everything changed, James and Vivian sat on their own veranda, a house in Charleston they'd bought together, not inherited or given. Their 2 children played in the garden, supervised by Catherine, who'd become the world's most devoted aunt. "Do you ever think about what would have happened?" Vivian asked, watching their daughter chase their son through the magnolia trees. "If you hadn't come to Savannah? If Marcus hadn't helped? If I'd actually married Richard?" "Sometimes," James admitted, "but not as much anymore. We made our choices. We live with the consequences. Good ones, in our case. The best ones." She took his hand. "You know what I tell the women who come to the resource center, when they say they're trapped, that they have no options? What? I tell them about a man who disguised himself as a footman because he loved his sister enough to seek truth, about an old butler who risked his job to do the right thing, about a judge who chose his daughter over his career. I tell them that even in the darkest situations, there are people willing to help. You just have to be brave enough to accept that help." And are they brave enough? Most of them, yes. Not right away sometimes, but eventually they find their courage, just like I did. Their daughter ran up to the veranda, breathless and laughing. "Mama, Papa, can we have a picnic dinner in the garden, please?" "Absolutely," Vivian said. "Go tell Aunt Catherine to help you pack the basket." As the children ran off, James pulled Vivian close. The evening air carried the scent of magnolias and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed. Life moved forward, as it always did, shaped by the choices people made when faced with impossible situations. "I love you," he said simply. I love you too. Always have since that first day when you asked if I was finding the work bearable. Since I realized someone finally saw me as a person, not a prize to be won. You were never a prize. You were always a person, strong, complicated, worthy of respect and freedom. It took me a while to believe that. Thank you for waiting while I figured it out. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind them, the house filled with the sounds of family, children laughing, Catherine telling stories, dinner being prepared. Ahead of them stretched years of ordinary joy, hard work, meaningful connections, and the deep satisfaction that came from building a life based on choice rather than obligation. The wedding that didn't happen had led to this, a marriage that did, a family that mattered, a future they'd created together, and in the end, that was the best revenge against people like Richard Beaumont, not destruction or punishment, but happiness. The simple, radical act of choosing love over fear, freedom over security, truth over comfortable lies. As darkness settled over Charleston and the first stars appeared, Vivian leaned her head on James's shoulder. "Tell me again," she said, "the part where you decided to save me." "I didn't save you," James replied, as he always did. "You saved yourself. I just held the door open." "Then tell me the part where you held the door open." So he did, recounting that October in Savannah when a duke, not really a duke but an heir pretending to be a footman, overheard secrets that changed everything. And as he spoke, their children drifted back to listen, drawn by the story they'd heard dozens of times but never tired of. The story of how their parents met, how courage and truth had won over manipulation and fear, and how sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose yourself, even when everyone else wanted you to choose something else. It was a story worth telling, a story worth living, and most importantly, a story with the ending they deserved, not perfect, not without scars or struggles, but honest and earned and fundamentally beautifully happy.